Hello and welcome to the inaugural episode of DNSN Radio, episode number 1. Today we're going to be diving deep into the NFC South. Starting off with the Atlanta Falcons, who are 3-2. So far they've posted wins in Week 1 over the Jaguars, a win in Week 3 over the 49ers, and a shootout victory over the Carolina Panthers in Week 4, 56-41. While losing at home against the Saints in Week 2 and losing to Seattle in Week 5. Now the Falcons' offense so far this year is really struggling. In fact, they're averaging only 27.6 points per game, which is good for 20th in DevNation, and they're averaging 337 yards per game overall, which is good for 23rd. Now, offensive woes aside, Derek Carr is on pace for a career year. He's currently edging his QBR from last year by 1 point for a career-high 119.5, and he's completing 67% of his passes with 13 touchdowns and 6 interceptions. Now, so far in his career, Derek Carr has shown amazing chemistry with star wide receiver Brandon Cooks, and thus far this year he's connected with Cooks 28 times for 717 yards and 9 touchdowns. That's right, Brandon Cooks already is closing in on a 1,000-yard season simply 5 games into the year. But the passing game, although it's shown some sparks, it hasn't been able to carry the running game, which is falling flat. In fact, the Falcons are only averaging 77 yards on the ground per game, which is 26th in the league. Javier Gresham, the star running back for the Falcons, has really struggled this year, averaging only 4.5 yards per carry, which is down almost a full yard, 0.8 yards per carry from last year, when he averaged 5.3. When we switch to the defensive side of the ball, the Falcons are doing better defensively than offensively. They're allowing 27.2 points per game, which is good for 14th in the league, which puts them plus 0.4, in the point differential. Safety Lonnie Ballentine leads the team in tackles with 37 tackles. He's proved to be a huge free agent signing during the bidding war a couple of years ago in the offseason. And as a team, the Falcons have combined for 6 sacks, and they've forced 15 turnovers. So at 3-2, the Falcons currently sit 1 game back in the NFC South. So how do the Falcons make the playoffs? The Falcons make the playoffs first and foremost if their running game is able to get back on track. The Falcons have always had a good running attack, but for some reason this year, Trevor has struggled to run the ball with Javier Gresham, and that has to remedy itself. He's good through the air, but he can't do it without the ground game, and so far you've seen that in a key loss to the Saints in Week 2. The second thing that the Falcons need to do to be able to win the division is they need to knock off the Saints on the road in Week 7. The Saints or the Falcons have won this division every season so far in DevNation, and if he wants to have a shot, he needs to take care of business on the road. And then he also needs to be able to knock off the Panthers again in Week 13. Now moving on to our next team, the Carolina Panthers. The Carolina Panthers are 3-2 through 5 games. They started the year off with 3 straight wins, on fire, leading the division and undefeated. But they've come off 2 straight losses, including a brutal thrashing by the Cardinals, 57-18. On the offensive side of the ball, the Panthers are doing quite well statistically, averaging 33 points per game, which is good for 11th in the league, and averaging 402 yards per game, which is also good for 11th. But this offense lives and dies on the shoulders of quarterback Cam Newton. Cam Newton's completing 59% of his passes for 1,572 yards and 8 touchdowns this year. Now that sounds like a pretty good stat line as long as you don't continue on to say that he's thrown 16 interceptions. That's right, 1 touchdown to every 2 interceptions for Cam Newton this season. To go inside the numbers a little bit, in their first 3 games, all 3 wins, Cam Newton completed 63% of his passes for 5 touchdowns and 2 interceptions with a 101 QBR. In their 2 losses in the last 2 games, he's completed 55% of his passes for 2 touchdowns, 14 interceptions, and a QBR of 52. In the running game, LaShawn McCoy has really struggled to give any support to Cam Newton. Now, granted, Cam Newton is eating up a volume of the reps as the Panthers prefer to air it out and throw the ball all over the field, but in the touches he's had, LaShawn McCoy has averaged only 3.5 yards per carry, and that has to improve. Defensively, the Panthers boast one of the most gargantuous defensive fronts in the league. They're giving up 30.2 points per game, which is 19th in the league, and is good for a plus 2.8 point differential. And they're giving up 334 yards, which is 14th. And they're largely dependent on offensive turnovers not killing them. They've had to face short fields a lot the last 2 weeks that have really driven these numbers up, as this defense is actually very, very good. Trey Boston leads the team with 31 tackles. And J.J. Watt is having a monster season. Through 5 games, J.J. Watt has 8 sacks, 2 interceptions, 1 forced fumble, and 20 tackles, 8 of them being tackles for loss. As a team, this front 7 has put together 21 sacks in 5 games. They're averaging over 4 sacks per game, which is just incredible. But the duo of J.J. Watt, Robert Quinn just eats defenses alive, especially with linebackers like Luke Kuechly in the background. And this defense has forced 11 turnovers this season. So the Panthers are a game back in the division. How do they make the playoffs? As I said earlier, this team lives and dies on the shoulders of Cam Newton. Cam has to protect the football. If Cam Newton protects the football, the Panthers are one of the best passing attacks in the league. But when he gets turnover prone, when he makes poor decisions, he kills this team like we've seen the last 2 weeks. Their defense is fierce, but the offense has to take care of the ball. And they enter into a divisional showdown with the division leader New Orleans Saints this week. And so it'll be interesting to see how that offense takes on the New Orleans defense. Move on to our next team, the aforementioned New Orleans Saints, who enter this week 4-1. They've posted big road wins against the Giants, the Falcons, a blowout sim win over the Texans, and then a crazy week 4 loss to the Seahawks, 34-37. That game saw 35 points scored in the final 3 minutes. And then they're coming off of a big win against the Titans, 35-28. The Saints offense has really been on fire this year. They're averaging 41.2 points per game, which is good for 3rd in the league. And they're averaging 418 yards per game, which is good for 7th. And quarterback Brent Hundley is on fire. So far through 5 games, he's completed 75% of his passes for 253 yards per game, 10.9 yards per completion, and a 125.5 QBR, which are all career highs for him. He's on track, if the season continues this way, to throw 29 touchdowns and 16 interceptions, both of which would also be career bests for him. Running back Latavius Murray is averaging almost 7 yards per carry with 6 touchdowns. But in garbage time against the Titans, he tore his shoulder labrum, and he's going to miss the next 3 weeks. So that could put the offense in a funk, but Robert Gandy will get a chance to step up. Coming off the bench, he's averaged 5.2 yards per carry with 3 touchdowns in very limited game time. He only has recorded 22 carries on the season. And so the question for this defense is, can he step up enough in this 3-game stretch to bridge the gap until Latavius Murray comes back? On the receiving end, wide receiver A.J. Jose is averaging 18.4 yards per catch this season, which is a dramatic improvement for the speedy playmaker. He catches a lot of underneath routes, but he's got 97 speed and 97 excel. And with that burst, he's been able to make the most of his yards after catch. Derek Gordon, the leading receiver from a year ago, is no longer a Saint. He was traded last week in a blockbuster to Michael Marquez, and the Minnesota Vikings. But newcomer Odell Beckham Jr. has already showed sparks of brilliance in his first game against the Titans, reeling in a crucial touchdown pass into double coverage on 3rd and 10. On the defensive side of the ball, the Saints are giving up 20.4 points per game, good for 4th in the league, and a remarkable 20.8 point differential. They're giving up 270 yards per game, which is good for 2nd in the league. But stats aside, the Saints' defense has struggled lately, giving up 37 and 28 points in their last 2 games and struggling to get off the field on 3rd downs. For a team that's well known for its defense and not known for its passing attack, the last few games have been very interesting to watch the Saints almost reverse roles as Hundley has stepped up and the defense has taken a step back. The Saints made a couple of notable transactions in this offseason, trading entirely out of the draft to get cornerback Jason Verrett and linebacker TJ Mendenhall. Those trades have worked out very well for them as Jason Verrett has 28 tackles, 1 tackle behind leader Malcolm Smith, who has 29, and Verrett has also picked off 3 passes. TJ Mendenhall has 24 tackles, and he's contributed 2.5 sacks. As a team, the Saints have 12 sacks. That's a number that you would like to see go up considering the defensive line that they have. But it's passable, and they've forced 10 turnovers. And so currently the Saints are in the driver's seat in the NFC South. But how do they make the playoffs? What do they need to do? Well, the Saints will make the playoffs if Brett Hundley doesn't come back down to earth. He's playing phenomenal football this season, the best of his career by far. And if he can even continue at a slightly reduced rate, the Saints are virtually a lock to make the playoffs. But will he be able to do it? Because over his career, Brett Hundley has gotten the reputation around the league of being a check-down king, being inaccurate in crucial moments, and ultimately making mistakes, poor reads, and throwing interceptions. He's played stellar through 5 games, but can he keep that up over the long haul? And finally, the Saints' defense needs to step up. I expect to see some regression from Hundley, but the Saints need their defense to be back on top form, and they'll be equipped to deal with this. That brings us to the final team in the division, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers are off to a horrific start to the season at 0-4. They have a 10-point loss to Carolina in Week 1, a 3-point loss to Tennessee in Week 2, a 28-point loss in Week 3 against Indianapolis, and a beatdown at the hands of the 49ers, 54-7. And then they had their bye this past week. Offensively, they're averaging 15.8 points per game, which is good for 29th in the league. And they're putting up 273 yards, which is 31st in the league. You're not going to win a lot of games with that type of offense unless you play stellar defense. Quarterback Deshaun Gardner has struggled this season. He's completing only 51% of his passes for 7.5 yards of completion, with 4 touchdowns and 6 picks. It's notable that in the 49ers game, he was benched for Logan Thomas, but Logan Thomas didn't fare much better, throwing 3 interceptions in the game. So coming out of the bye week, who will be starting at quarterback for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers? Deshaun Gardner or Logan Thomas? On the ground, Jeremy Hill's only averaging 4.1 yards per carry. They really need him to take a step forward to take the pressure off of these struggling quarterbacks. The lone bright spot for this team's offense has been wide receiver Janelle Cofield, who's averaging 26 yards per catch and has scored 3 touchdowns in this season. On the defensive side of the ball, things certainly aren't much better. The defense is yielding 37.8 points per game, which is good for 29th in the league with a negative 22-point differential. And they're giving up 394.5 yards per game, which is good for 22nd. Now, I will concede that they've been very good against the pass. They're only 12th in the league in passing yards allowed, but they rank 30th against the run. This run defense has got to take a step forward if they want to become competitive on the defensive side of the ball. There were a lot of rumors in the offseason that veteran linebacker Levante David was being shopped around by Coach Pascal. Now, ultimately, Pascal did not trade Levante David, and he leads the team with 40 tackles. So the veteran is anchoring the fold, but what is the rest of the defense doing? In truth, not a lot. They've only managed to get 7 sacks, and they've forced 7 turnovers through 4 games. So the Buccaneers are 0-4. They're 4 games back in the division. What do they need to do to make the playoffs? They need to win out. They probably don't have to win out, but 6 losses is probably the worst that they can have and get into the playoffs. The last 2 seasons, the NFC South representative has entered with a 5-loss and a 6-loss season. Now, the NFC South is a deep conference, and they will beat up on one another. And so the Buccaneers have a chance to sneak back into this race, but they need to start winning, and they need to start winning now. They need to regroup on this bye week. They've got to figure out the quarterback puzzle. Who's going to play at quarterback? Is it going to be Gardner? Is it going to be Thomas? If you've got 2 quarterbacks, you've got no quarterbacks. And so who's the quarterback in Tampa Bay? And he has to step in and play well immediately. And then they need to step up their run defense. Their passing defense has been pretty good, 12th in the league, but their run defense has struggled. And they've got to get tougher in the trenches if they want to have a chance. Well, that'll wrap it up for episode 1 of DNSN Radio as we take a deep dive into the NFC South. Tune in next week. We're going to take a dive into a AFC division, look at some stats and some playoff scenarios. If you guys like this podcast, be sure and give us a like and a subscription on the YouTube channel. And I will catch you guys next time.